So I came up with the title A Breakdown because by a certain point in the script it started to sound like a tutorial but with spicy comments thrown in haphazardly. While that still is the core of the video and only slightly different to your usual critiques or retrospectives, I found this to be my preferred style of writing as opposed to a more focused analysis because I'm autistic and can't focus on one thing for more than 5 seconds. This is also because I feel that many people aren't realistic when they talk about games nowadays. For example, Fallout 1's role-playing prowess has been blown out of proportion for some reason. There is a lot more dialogue to be a good person than an evil one, because a lot of evil dialogue will just make everyone hostile. Most videos will show you talking down the master, and it is a scene that is still amazing to this day, but some reviewers do act like that's the standard for the game instead of a once-off. There is some genuine role-playing to be done, but it is simple. The game is pretty good, don't get me wrong, it's just been very quickly overshadowed by its contemporaries. With that being said, I'm just going to dive right in. This menu looks like a lot, and it sort of is. You have your special, your name, your age, your sex, your skills, your character points, optional traits, tag skills, current stats, and the option to print it all out. I said the stuff that actually isn't important for the funnies, but it's actually not that bad, I swear. The special system, an acronym for Strength, Perception, Endurance, Charisma, Intelligence, Agility, and Luck, is the core of your character. This basically governs everything from starting skill levels to perks you can unlock and what type of character you're going to be. The lowest point is 1 and the highest is 10. A few of the stats can be affected by traits during character creation but can only be increased or decreased by certain scenarios or characters out in the world. Strength. This mainly affects how much you can stimulate the junk economy. Gives you a minor HP bonus and how hard your melee weapons hit. I'd recommend most builds stick to around 4 to 5 as that's sort of the sweet spot. However, not a lot of perks and checks tied to it are useful, such as bonus hand-to-hand damage and strong back, which are not worth the extremely limited perk slots you have. I will go over perks during the gameplay section as you can't start with any. Perception, the skill of sight and sound. This affects quite a few things such as unlocking certain dialogue options, your chance to hit with a ranged weapon, how early your first turn is in combat if you start combat with an extra free turn, and during a random encounter how far away you start from the enemies. To be fair, I've played low and high perception characters and it wasn't really game changing, so unless you're sponsored by the puzzle piece people, I don't really think it's worth trying to manipulate. Perception is one of the more important stats for both new players and veterans as it unlocks both beginner friendly and incredibly broken endgame perks, more on that later. 6 is a nice starting area, but you can get away with 5 if you know what you're doing. Endurance. This affects your starting HP, including how much extra HP you get per level, your poison and radiation resistance, which isn't really something you should think about because only one early game enemy poisons you and you can just take Rad-X to deal with radiation in all of the 3 places it's actually an issue. It also affects your healing rate, which is just how much you heal over time. Can also be improved by mid perks that exist for some reason. Literally whatever number you want is fine, it just affects the difficulty of the early game really. Charisma. Has a controversial history throughout the series and is also genuinely useless as it only affects NPCs' initial reactions to you, which don't really do anything, and the prices of things, which can be boosted with the barter skill if you really need to. Although the economy is very easy to break in Fallout 1, so I wouldn't bother. Useless stat, useless perks, dump the stat and use the points elsewhere. Sorry if it seems like I'm repeatedly glossing over the stats and perks for some of the special types, but most of them aren't really worth using, let alone talking about. It sounds lazy, I know, but when a solid 80% of perks are increase this, tax that, and a +1 resistance to children at a Smash tournament, it's genuinely not worth the time. Intelligence. Affects damn near every skill in the game and what choices you can make in dialogue, while also increasing how many extra skill points you get when you level up. Hands down one of the most powerful stats. Minimum is 7 unless you want to play a dumb character who can literally only talk in grunts, then lower your intelligence to 4 and under. As entertaining as it is watching how people react to a genuine idiot, this changes the game quite drastically as some people will take pity on you, but certain quest givers will insult you or even outright attack you because of how stupid you are. Which means it also blocks off a fair amount of content. Up to you, kitten. Agility. This affects your action points, armor class, and even more skills than intelligence, although more combat related ones. I will explain both of those things later on. Agility has some absolutely insane perks, so I recommend starting with either a 7 or a 9. You get an extra action point per even number of agility, and because you can upgrade your agility by 1 in-game, this starts you off with a good number, but also allows you to get really awesome perks. Luck. This game is a CRPG. That means background dice rolls. For every skill check you attempt, for every chance you have to get a critical hit, how good your gambling is, which doesn't really mean anything because gambling is useless. It also affects your chances to get the funny XD special encounters like seeing the TARDIS from Doctor Who or Godzilla's yummy feet impression. Combo with a high agility and intelligence and you pretty much win the game. Next is traits. These are optional double-edged swords you can apply to your character. You can choose from having none, 1 or 2 traits at a time. Some traits are just flat out better than others in terms of viability or even fun, as subjective as that is. The list is as follows. Bloody Mess. Basically guarantees the gory death animations that randomly happen when someone dies in combat. The downside being it locks you into something every player should do in the ending. Technically doesn't actually do anything positive or negative in the grand scheme of things. Bruiser. Gives you +2 to your strength stat, but you lose 2 action points. If you're a melee character, which is what this trait is aimed at, you need those 2 action points to get in range. Poorly balanced, to be honest. Chem Reliant / Resistant. All these do is affect chem use in the game by halving chances to get addicted or increasing your recovery time from said addiction, with the trade-offs being chems last half as long or having twice the chance to get addicted. Not worth it because chem use isn't really a big thing in Fallout 1, aside from like Rad-X and maybe Psycho if you're like having trouble in a fight. Fast metabolism. Your healing rate goes up +2, but your poison and radiation resistance start at 0 instead. This is a nothing trait because the +2 healing rate isn't really noticeable or game changing, and as mentioned before, radiation and poison aren't really a big thing in the game. You get nothing for nothing, I guess. Fast Shot. A fantastic trait for beginners that just want to point and click on things without bothering to learn weak points because every attack you do uses 1 less action point, but you can't manually aim at a target's individual limbs. Technically raises your DPS and makes combat a little bit more accessible. Finesse. A weird trait, is very powerful if paired with a high luck build. Crit chances improve by 10%, but all damage is reduced by 30%. But instead of outright reducing your damage, it actually adds a +30 damage resistance modifier to all attacks. Guess what damage resistance does? However, this is ignored by critical hits. Basically, it just does a lot of damage, if you're lucky. Gifted. The most OP trait hands down. You get a +1 to all special stats, but take 10 points off all skills, and you get 5 less points on level up. That sounds harsh, but only so many skills are actually worth leveling. This is the easiest trade-off in the history of trade-offs. It gives you so much freedom on any build. Good-natured. Raises non-combat skills, lowers combat skills. Very simple. However, this is actually a pretty good trait because unless you are planning to be a Master of War type character, in which case why would you be good-natured, you get more points than you lose as most players are only going to use 1 or 2 combat skills at a time over the course of a playthrough. Heavy-handed. If you're struggling in the early game as a melee character, then this could be useful. It's a +4 to melee damage, but you lose out on 30% crit chance. Doesn't scale out to the end game, but it can help you get there if you're going full melee. Jinxed. A really fun trait. Makes everyone including you have more critical failures. These are actually insane and can range from people losing turns, taking damage, hitting a random person instead, breaking your own limbs, your weapon explodes, and depending on the weapon, it affects you differently. Like if a flamethrower critically fails, the weapon explodes and sets you on fire. Incredibly fun trait and makes combat much more entertaining. Kamikaze. This is a stupid trait. It reduces your armor class to 0 without armor, but allows you to almost always go first in combat. Not worth it by a long shot. Even though you come by armor really quickly, it's still a waste when you could have a higher perception and have access to better perks. Night Person, another stupid trait. Gives you extra +1 to intelligence and perception at night, but negative to both stats during the day. Most NPCs will only talk to you during the day, so reduced intelligence is only going to hurt you in the long run. One-hander. I had a low-hanging fruit joke here, but I'm better than that. Gives you a +20% to hit with one-handed weapons and unarmed, but -40% to hit with all two-handed weapons. Really good for melee characters as a majority of weapons, including just your hands and feet, are one-handed. Skilled. The polar opposite of gifted. Get a measly +10 to all skills, but get a perk every 4th level instead of 3rd. With a level cap of 21, this limits the amount of perks you can get from 7 to 5, which is a big blow to the majority of builds. Even though, to be honest, the chance of actually getting to max level is low even if you are doing all the content in the game. It's still not worth it because it means much more time in between perks that are potential power spikes. Small frame. You gain +1 agility, but your carry weight becomes, and I promise this is the only formula I'm mentioning because I do know what grass feels like, 25 pound base carrier weight plus 15 times current strength. It's a strong trait to have because with even one companion, the drawback is essentially negated. Plus things just aren't really heavy in the game. Skills are kind of bloated in that not a lot of them really do anything or have practical use outside of role-playing, but the ones that are useful are super useful. It's unbalanced how many important checks are allocated to so little skills. All skills are derived from your special stats and any traits you may have. Now I feel like I've been a bit strict on what is good and bad and why regarding traits and special stats. This is a role-playing game after all, so I'm going to be a bit more vague on the skills. All skills except for a few are what they say on the tin, so I'm not going to tell you how small guns handles pistols and rifles and energy weapons handle laser weapons. There are combat skills such as small and big guns, energy weapons, unarmed, melee weapons, and throwing things. There are passive skills, aka things your character can notice or just have a background skill check, like speech, barter, gambling, and outdoorsman. Lastly, there's skills that you have to manually use in the world like first aid, doctor, sneak, lockpick, steal, traps, science, and repair. Okay, I lied, I'm going to tell you what skills are kind of mid so you can save your skill points. For combat, you can ignore throwing because grenades and throwing knives only do so much damage and aren't that common either. For active skills, you can ignore first aid, sneak, steal, and traps. First aid is a worse version of doctor because it can't heal broken limbs, sneaking and stealing is never needed nor worth the hassle, and traps will detect most traps automatically without even leveling it. Finally, passive skills like gambling and outdoorsman don't need to be leveled. There are two locations you can gamble in, and outdoorsman gets ratioed by luck by how it affects positive and negative encounters out in the map. Current stats here are a lot more simple. Yes, most of them can be gleaned from the words on the screen, but for the waypoint marker gamers in the audience. Armor class. For anyone who's played a tabletop game, you will know this straight away. For those with social lives, this is basically a chance to hit for everyone involved. When you attack, the game first generates a number from 1 to 100, and checks that generated number against a target number. If the generated number is lower or equal than the target number, then the attack is a hit. The higher your AC, the better. After your AC is passed and you take damage, another stat is then calculated. Damage threshold / resistance. These two are put together despite only seeing damage resistance on the screen. DT is before DR. DT is like if the armor you're wearing would actually stop that bullet, and then damage resistance is just a flat percentage. The number you see is how much damage is taken off the hit. I'll explain action points later on. Carry weight. Guess what this does? Melee damage. Guess what this does? Sequence. Who goes first in combat? Pretty simple. However, there's a hidden mechanic called the, quoting the wiki here, surprise turn. If the player starts combat first, then they can have 2 turns in a row. The surprise turn, then the actual first turn of the combat scenario. Also can save you if you get attacked first, as it will let you retaliate sooner in case you need to heal or move. Healing rate. Quote from the in-game description, at the end of each day, your character will heal 1 HP for each point of healing rate. When you rest, you heal every 6 hours. This is nice and all, but every time you click the wait until healed button, it's going to take a day or two regardless, unless you have like 80 HP. Finally, for the most complex one of all, critical chance. Guess what this does? For the sake of time, I'm not going to be explaining perks too much for a few reasons. 1, there are about 5 good perks in the game. This video is already turning too much into a tutorial than a critique for my liking. 3, I can't be fucked. Finally, some settings and a mod to help make the game feel more accessible. Go to preferences and crank combat speed to max while ticking affects player speed, set running to always, text delay to slow so text is on screen for longer, and lower the max volume as the game is quite loud by default. Whether you play on the Steam or GOG version, both will have the high-res patch installed by default, which for some reason people say is fine to play the game as it is. Game's quite buggy, and will crash on you. It's 25 years old. To help alleviate this, I highly recommend you install the Fallout Fixed patch. This does have the option to add cut content and even tweak the game, but if you select the purist mode, it only fixes actual bugs, which, for transparency's sake, is what I played and the footage you're watching. However, it does add quality of life features such as holding shift to see items you can pick up and containers you can open. This doesn't break the balance of the game as some would think, as all it removes is some, but not all, of the minor pixel hunting the game can have. And on modern monitors like mine, it removes a lot of squinting. It also adds scrolling in your inventory and shops alongside adding a take-all button for looting. This mod hasn't been updated in years and is slowly being overtaken by Fallout 2, which is porting Fallout 1 into 2's engine with all of the features that entire details, like moving companions out of the way manually, which is definitely not a purist option, and the mod developer agrees. Though in my opinion, the mod isn't as stable as it claims. I mean no ill will, my PC probably just overdosed on copium when I installed it. The game has a relatively simple premise. Sometime before the events of the game, a nuclear apocalypse happened and people hid in underground survival shelters called vaults, with a designated number on the end, which have machines that provide food and water. 84 years later, one of the vaults, specifically your vault, Vault 13, chips that help provide water, gives up the ghost. The overseer says someone needs to go out and look for a replacement part in a nearby Vault 15, and your character pulls the short straw. So they must go out into the unknown wastes and look for one. Gross oversimplification aside for reasons of, this is not a fucking lore video, this is what we're working with. It's a pretty good base for a character aside from being in an underground vault for all their life. Nothing about them is set in stone, so role-playing is heavily encouraged. However, you do have a time limit, which seems more important than it actually is, considering how quickly time goes when you're traveling across the map. This makes the early to mid-game have some pressure that probably isn't needed, so that players can have time to mess around and get used to the mechanics, while also taking away time from soaking in the world because they are under the clock. If you are really struggling, there is a point in the game where you can grant yourself another 100 days on top of the 150-day time limit. This makes the first quarter of replays the same, as experienced players will just rush the water chips so they can take their time with the rest of the game. Alright, here we go. Time to start your adventure. Your character is going to see what the outside world looks like for the first, and it's a cave. A dark cave, full of rats. This is your litmus test for how viable your character's combat skills are going to be for the first hour. The rats don't hit hard, nor do they have a high chance to hit, but the darkness of the cave does affect your hit chance at a certain range, and it's not implicitly told to you. If you are struggling to kill a single rat after more than 2 turns, it may be time to go back to the character creation screen. Even though it came out later, the game I can most equate the character creation to is Morrowind. In both games, as long as you commit to your skill points and try to exclusively use them, you'll be fine. So most combat will start with an enemy seeing you and taking the first turn, which, considering the fact that almost every enemy in the game has the eyesight of an eagle, will sprint towards you and then run out of action points. Action points are what allows everyone to take an action, whether it be move, attack, reloading, or checking your inventory. Run out of action points and your turn ends. Like a tabletop game, attacks have a chance to hit that factors in distance, light level, negative 4% chance in darkness, armor class, and agility. You can also bring up a separate menu to aim at a specific body part on your target, with most things being weak to a good shot in the eyeballs. So just spam that for easy mode. Unless you took the fast shot trait, then point, click, and pray. Don't feel too intimidated. Fallout is just a tabletop game, or was before Bethesda. Fallout as a series has iconic visuals. Despite the game taking place centuries in the future, it shows a world stuck in the 1950s cultural spirit. The average man's car is a Chrysler ripoff called a Highwayman, advertisements inspired by pin-up girls from the same era, and even in the dialect of NPCs. It doesn't take a gynecologist to see that Fallout 1's visuals are quite dated by today's standards. Everything is all grainy.
Is that there is too much brown.
Everyone looks pretty similar, except for the 21 people in the game who jump scare you with intense and jagged animations called talking heads. These had an interesting development cycle. In a process that took 8 weeks to finish, a sculptor molded clay heads, then were digitized using a Pharaoh space arm, please don't ask me what that is, and Vertisketch, which is just 3D modeling software, and textured with Photoshop. These are really impressive for the time, and the brilliant voice acting is what helps them hold up in a twisted, uncanny valley way. It's been interesting in my research reading reviews of the game when it came out, because even back then, people were divided on its visuals. One article from GameZilla said Fallout's graphics were okay, and compared them to later Ultima games, but fell short when it came to its contemporaries, such as Diablo and even Planescape Torment a few years later. This particular review was 2 years after release, I'll admit, but it was a good read. While Quandary and GameSpot praised its visuals as detailed and extremely similar in style and quality to Origin's Crusader games. Regardless of opinion, the game, after using the high-res patch, is actually quite clear on mod monitors with a proper setup. My footage has been brightened in OBS recording with filters, and it does make it look a bit washed, and I apologize for that. I was gaslit by my second monitor's TN panel. You can clearly make out what is a tree, a car, a building, a person, and a hostile creature in the game, so it's not hamstrung in gameplay too much because of the old visuals. However, certain interactable objects on the ground can be nigh impossible to see with the wrong lighting and positioning. I have 100 hours of this game over 10 years and only just found out there was a hunting rifle in Vault 15 because of the aforementioned Fallout fixed patch, showing me items I can pick up when I hold shift. The repeating wall textures can make two quests that involve interacting with them a pain, as they look identical to other walls in the same map, but you would only know they are special if you move your mouse over them. The game uses an oblique projection view, which is designed for drawing 2D images of 3D objects. This provides the game with a trimetric perspective instead of isometric. The difference being, instead of all dimensions being the same with isometric, with trimetric the three axes are foreshortened so the angles where they meet are all different. Not that this will stop people in the future calling it isometric, but I don't care, my autism is somewhat satisfied. Now, if you think the rats in the cave was the tutorial, you'd be mistaken, and that's okay, because in both subtle and in-your-face ways, Shady Sands is the actual tutorial of the game. It's also a filter I really enjoy. Some people may think the progression gates can be a bit obnoxious, but I don't really see how, when the one item you need to progress the main story can be acquired in 3 different ways with exploration, bartering, or stealing. More on that later. Walking into town, we are greeted by Seth, who kindly asks you to holster your weapon if you have one equipped. Talking to Seth will inform us of the Raider and Rad Scorpion problem that Shady Sands is having, and to talk to the leader Aradesh if we have any questions. Opposite Seth is Katarina. She is the in-your-face part of the tutorial I mentioned earlier. All of her dialogue is about in-game mechanics such as bartering, healing, and using certain skills. This is actually an unmarked quest, and when you finish all her dialogue, you get 250 XP. Following directions from Seth, we talk to Aradesh and jump because the transition from talking to the head appearing is nearly instant. Aradesh is voiced by Tony Shalhoub, who I only know from my childhood as Alexander Minion from Spy Kids. I probably mispronounced that, but anyway. He gives us our first proper side quest, Stop the Rad Scorpions. There is a nearby cave filled with rad scorpions that are harassing the villagers and killing livestock, and our job is ceasing that. Aradesh will also mention the villager's Dr. Razlo. Talking to Razlo reveals he can make an antidote if we can get a rad scorpion tail. Going back to Seth, he can take us to the rad scorpion cave. We actually have 2 options for dealing with them. We can either kill all of the rad scorpions in the cave or blow up a part of the cave wall. This involves the first of 2 wall texture scouring to find a potential solution, as well as the player finding the pack of dynamite in Vault 15 and finally putting the 2 together. Most players will just kill all the rad scorpions, which can be a serious drain on your resources this early in the game. Also making sure to grab a tail for Razlo. Going back, Aradesh will thank us, and talking to Razlo will give us an antidote. Don't bother saving this for us, as you've already conquered the biggest group of the only enemies that can poison you in the game. Hope you didn't build for poison resistance. Instead, use the antidote on the man you 100% missed in the background. Another unmarked quest completed. I've made mention of unmarked quests twice now, because you should already have a few quests in your Pip-Boy log. However, the game is very inconsistent on what should and shouldn't be marked. For example, it's fine that healing a random person is unmarked. It shouldn't take up space. However, a quest that involves freeing a town from tyrannical mercs, even though I admit some of the quests in that quest line are actually marked, there is another 2 quests in it that are unmarked, or freeing slaves from raiders. A minor gripe, but I do wish all quests were marked, just for accessibility's sake. Say you're someone who likes to hoover up side quests, then do them all in a big session. You can forget some quests even exist or what to do. Moving on, if you have a science skill over 40%, you can tell a farmer he's not farming efficiently for some XP. What you are supposed to do is go to Vault 15, and after a bit of exploring, you find that you cannot progress because the elevator is broken and you need a way to climb down. This is Fallout's filter. There are 3 ropes in Shady Sands you can get by looking around on the floor of a shed, stealing from a shelf in someone's house, or bartering some from Seth. Just explore, homie. Now I'm going to skip time and pretend we've been away from Shady Sands for a bit. Talking to Seth reveals Tandy, Aradesh's daughter, has been kidnapped by the second problem, raiders. Aradesh pleads with us to save her from the raiders, and we oblige. Traveling to the raiders doesn't take long, and we can see they are called the Khans from the map screen. I'm also sick of saying raiders. Now, there are a lot of Khans who will wipe the floor with you at this level. Thankfully, this quest actually has a fair amount of ways to complete it. You can kill all the Khans, challenge the leader Garl to unarmed combat for Tandy's freedom, purchase her, intimidate Garl with a speech check, sneak behind the building, stealth killing the guards, aka using melee. This is genuine stealth used 1 out of 1 in the game, so don't get your hopes up. Blow up the door to a cell with even more dynamite you definitely didn't search up how to find. And finally, a male character with a luck stat of 9 wearing leather armor or a stealth boy, which is actually possible to get at this point in the game, can be mistaken by the Khans as the ghost of Garl's father and then passing a speech check. No, I didn't make that up. Once you hopefully get Tandy safe, Aradesh gives you $500 dues, which is a decent amount this early on. That's pretty much the main content of Shady Sands. It's a pretty good tutorial. It has both short and long form sections. While I just zoom through it, none of this stuff has a time limit, ignoring the main one, so you can return later if need be. Hell, you're supposed to be gone a fair amount of time and only chance upon finding out Tandy has been stolen. At least that's my running theory, because the quest doesn't start until you spend more than 2 days away from Shady Sands and finish the Rad Scorpion quest. Plus, whether you go the skill check or the combat route, both are pretty tough on low-level characters. You're taught how to barter, heal, and use skills on ourselves. Exploring the map can give us what we need. Stealing is useful, the general flow of quests. Sometimes items from one area can be found somewhere else. There are usually multiple solutions to a problem, and that the game has companions. Yes, I'm skimming over Ian until we get to Junktown. You'll see why in a bit. Vault 15 is for all intents and purposes a dungeon. You go through multiple levels of a dark, decrepit area, clearing it of enemies, getting a really good amount of loot for the early game, and a nice XP reward at the end. This is the second part of the filter I mentioned before. You go down the ladder after killing the scorpion, then clearing out a few cave and pig rats, and running into your first lesser mole rat. Simple enough, until you see an elevator shaft. The elevator itself was completely destroyed. Most players will flub around a bit before looking up a walkthrough, seeing they needed a rope and exclaiming, how the fuck was I supposed to know that? Use rope, go down. The second level actually does this again, however the rope is directly across from the door in a locker. This could have been done on the first floor, teaching the player to loot around, and then on the second floor force them to leave the vault to find another rope. However, I can see why this might have been avoided, as it does add some backtracking, so maybe they already thought of it. The third floor has a fair amount of loot as well, but your ultimate goal is to go down the hallway to your character's left, your right, and closely look at the rock pile to realize that you can't get to the vault's water chip. So that's part 1 done. I'm genuinely scared of the reception, or lack thereof, towards the video. I know it's a weird mix between a patrician TV and a chamois video, because it sort of is. They're my two biggest influences as a potential content creator. I'm sorry if I sound awkward or nasally, but apparently that's just what I sound like, and didn't notice it until I spent 20 hours editing my voice. If there's any interaction this video gets, I would prefer it to be directed at the things I did wrong rather than right, so I can hopefully make part 2 better. Speaking of part 2, there is some context in the description for both the creation process of this video and where I may go from here. Just want to say thank you to everyone who pushed me to finish it, especially Prometheus Prime, who is another good content creator. Thank you for watching.